Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 10 is one of those chapters where your emotions are going to be all over the place. We have death, we have new powers being unlocked, more lores being added to the Naruto franchise, and we have the Uchiha family tradition of trying to kill your loved ones, continuing with Sarada versus Hidari. So we open up the chapter where the last one left off. Jura is watching Inojin fly with Himawari and all the other members of Team 10, getting them off to safety, running for their lives because they realized that Jura, he was at level 100 floor boss and they didn't have enough health bars or the right equipment to continue fighting, so they did the smart thing and they retreated. This leads to Jura remarking that escape from him, it is pointless, and that makes sense. They are flying away from a guy who can literally compress the power of a 10 tails Bijudama down into a pint-sized ball and fire it off. It's like trying to run away from Sukuna's domain expansion. Unless you are literally the fastest guy in the verse, you can't escape it, and that's the level of speed that Team 10 needs to get away from somebody like Jura. But thankfully for them, Jura, he isn't quite yet ready to choose violence. He takes note of the fact that Team 10, they want to move the location of the battlefield away from the village area because they don't want the village to get destroyed. This is, as we've seen in the Boruto Naruto Next Generation story, it is a very common tactic. If a fight breaks out in the village, one or two things tends to occur. Number one, you do what Naruto did against Delta, where they fought at the Hokage's private training grounds next door to the academy, and Naruto mostly kept the battle strictly to taijutsu, and he was trying to lead the battle away from the kids that are watching, and he limited the area damage when he does use chakra-based ninjutsu to avoid the headline 7th Hokage blows up the village. Number two, if there is an option to move the fight outside the village, you do so the first chance you get. Heroes and Sarutobi attempted that during the Nine Tails attack when he forced the Nine Tails outside the village in the manga in volume 53, which that's also what Boruto and Sasuke did when Naruto and Ishiki destroyed a small part of the village with their short taijutsu exchange. What's interesting here is that Jura is regarding them with a little bit of respect and, dare I say it, a little bit of curiosity, which that is in character for him. He's not someone who just goes from 0 to 10 right away. Even when he previously fought the members of Team 10, the only one who he was diverting any real heat towards, that was Himawari, and he was looking to avoid too much with Team 10 in terms of violence until they forced his hand by continuing to fight him. However, what we see here is that Jura has taken notice of Team 10 flying off, but before he can do much of anything, Konohamaru has led the way to the battlefield with a team of small jonin with them, and the usage of Konohamaru here is both a gift and a curse. One of the things we saw in Boruto Naruto Next Generations is that as each arc passed by in the manga, Konohamaru's role, it gradually decreased, especially once each of his students surpassed him by the third arc of the manga, where the only advantage he really had was he was more experienced as a shinobi. Well, we're now in a sequel to that very same manga, and on one hand, seeing Konohamaru as advisor of the 8th Hokage with a small team with him on the battlefield under his command, that's really cool to see because he's showing an unwavering loyalty to the village. He's showing that Shikamaru trusts him. He's also just happening to do all this amazing stuff against two very, very powerful targets, which means that losing streak in that new era is gonna continue to rack up. When Konohamaru arrives, he informs Shikamaru that Team 10, it isn't in the location anymore, but the two intruders still are, and Shikamaru informs Konohamaru that Team 10 and Himawari, they've managed to escape and are attempting to move the battlefield away from the village, and this is where it gets very interesting. Shikamaru brings everyone up to speed about what's going on and that Himawari is the target of the two awakened Shinju, and upon hearing this, Kawaki immediately snaps to attention, and this is a pretty big moment for Kawaki's character. It shows that beneath that cold exterior that we've seen, there's still the heart of that young boy who Naruto saw good inside of when he brought him into the village. He let Kawaki sleep with him in his office, and this is the narrative taking the time to show us that while Kawaki might have done some rather questionable things in the past, some things that fans likely will never forgive him for, there are still those embers of goodness burning inside of him, and he does have a capacity to care for someone other than Naruto, because we see it here. When Himawari called him Big Bro, it was a pretty clear sign that there was some guilt fueling his response when he tells her, "How many times have I told you not to call me that?" And the hurt look on her face showed that this likely happened over 9,000 different times during the 3 years. Right here though, the moment that he hears Himawari's in danger, Kawaki looks pissed off. He looks shocked, and it's a moment that shines a little bit of light through the dark clouds that have been gathered around Kawaki. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the village, we have Boruto and he's so scared that the guy, he's struggling to catch his breath. He's got sweat beads that are dripping down his face, and he's holding his arm where the karma seal has spread. And this, my friends, is more important than you might think. It's just one more sign that what Amato told Boruto in chapter 69 of Boruto part 1 was correct. Momoshiki can still hijack his body, and if he doesn't continue taking the Byakugan suppressant drugs, Momoshiki will be a problem. And Boruto's fear right now, it is at an all-time high because of the circumstances. All of this is happening at the worst possible moment. His adopted brother, he wants to kill him, but Boruto doesn't share that same feeling. He wants to work things out with Kawaki, which is irrelevant because if he loses control, Momoshiki, he's got other plans for Kawaki. If you have Boruto who knows the truth about Himawari and that she's being hunted down by the awakened Shinju, like we saw Shikamaru tell him in the last chapter, and despite the fact that he wants to go give chase and protect his sister because he's her natural big brother, even if nobody remembers it, he can't do it because he's a liability right now due to not being able to properly control his karma. This, my friends, is the perfect example of good external conflict manifesting and clashing with the external conflict of the story. Very good for Boruto's character. This is what makes Shikamaru's words to Kawaki so ironic here, which is that Boruto shouldn't be a priority for him right now because they all share a common enemy in those awakened Shinju. And while he is right, Boruto's fear of the karma also backs up Kawaki's claim that Boruto's still a threat because of Momoshiki, but thankfully, even Kawaki can set aside his hate for Boruto long enough to agree to go save Himawari, and he even makes it a point to come across as annoyed by the fact that Shikamaru didn't reveal this information about Himawari sooner. But the irony of that is that Boruto told him in the last chapter, instead of worrying about him, why doesn't Kawaki focus on protecting the village? And as we'll see in a moment, Kawaki's about to learn there are consequences for his actions because something that happens at the end of the chapter could have been prevented if he listened to Boruto. While Kawaki and Delta fly off to provide reinforcements to Himawari and Team 10, Shikamaru checks in on Boruto, whose karma has stayed active, and the toad that has Kashin Koji planted on Boruto looks equally as troubled, alluding to the fact that Momoshiki, the boogeyman problem, is still very much an issue and that Boruto is going to be sidelined for a while, which in all honesty, that's the right decision. We have multiple battles being set up right now. Putting Boruto on the sideline for a moment, that is the right call because even if it's only for half a chapter to say a full chapter, it allows for the other characters to get their moment so we as readers can see the important information like where these characters scale and also see how the various interactions all add to or take away from their character development, or if they're flat one-dimensional characters, whether or not they continue to serve their role well or whether or not they get replaced. Back in the central business district, Hidari, he's staring down Konohamaru and his team, and as he does so, he's following Jura's lead on what to do with Konohamaru's group, and Jura's basically like, yo dog, I'm leaving the light work to you, by basically flying off to give chase on Himawari, and Konohamaru takes note of the direction. Yet before he can do anything, Hidari, he just shows up right in front of Konohamaru, and this leads to an exchange between the two groups, and Konohamaru drops some rather important information for us as readers when he checks with the central unit about, hey, you told me that Sasuke was the one here, and they say, hey, he is standing right in front of you. Now this leads to something very interesting because it adds to what we know. The awakened Shinju, they have the chakra of the Ten Tails, they have the chakra of White Karma Seal Code, and they have the chakra of the people who they bit to become awakened Shinju, and they have features that look like them, but to the people in the universe, they can't tell the difference, which I can see that to a degree. Outside of Code, who recognize the bug Shinju as being Bug, and Boruto, who recognize Hidari as being Sasuke, we haven't really seen much recognition. Based on the cover for chapter 8, we know that the skin complexion of the awakened Shinju, it is different. If they all have Jura's complexion, then they have a darker skin tone than the people they got their chakra from. So that could be what's throwing people off. This is important to keep in mind because of what happens next. The introduction of Hidari's main target, Sarada. The moment that Konohamaru calls out to Sarada and class rep who finally arrives on the scene behind Sarada, Hidari's eyes, they narrow and the guy immediately starts wanting all the smoke with Sarada. In the span of a few seconds, Hidari not only vanishes inside the claw mark that he was standing on, but he simultaneously produced a line of 3 claw marks in a brilliant way that weren't previously there, in front and behind Sarada and behind class rep. Essentially, he's hoping to checkmate each of them. He can attack either one of them from the front or from behind and do so in mere moments. And he attempts to do just that by going straight straight after Sarada from the blind side with the Chidori, aiming it forward before class rep can react, and in the same span of time, Sarada not only cuts on a Sharingan, she dodges the attack and she counters with her own Chidori, which doesn't need the use of hand signs to use, and she tags Hidari with her own Chidori that sends him onto the ground, doing damage to him before class rep and Konohamaru can take 3 steps towards him, and Hidari hits the ground moments before the other two can reach Sarada. At this point, we need to start calling Sarada our tribal chief, like her name is Roman Reigns, because she is levels above. I'm not going to go over the scaling here for where Sarada is at the end of part 1 and where she might be right now, because I did a conservative video already scaling exactly where Sarada is at the end of Boruto part 1. So the only real things I will say here are these 2 things. Number 1, we have some basis for where Hidari and the other Shinju already scale based off of information prior. The brief skirmishes that Boruto had with them in chapter 4, chapter 6 where the narrative used Ada to say that they're in a different league than Code without limiters, and chapter 2 where Boruto flat out tells Code you need to destroy the 10 tails before you are unable to annihilate it, which that lines up directly with the awakened Shinju scaling above Code, and that backs up Ada's assertion that they're in a different league than Code, because otherwise Boruto wouldn't have said you couldn't annihilate them. Number 2, Sarada, before her conversation with Boruto in chapter 6, she spent the last 3 years for the first time in her life feeling hatred, and hatred is one of the powers that we are told repeatedly in Naruto's manga. It directly strengthens both the Sharingan and the Mangekyo Sharingan. She knows that Kawaki killed Boruto, that he tried to kill him yet again, and he almost was able to kill Sarada, but Boruto got his scar protecting her, and then he stole Boruto's life, and until her conversation with Boruto, Sarada was under the impression that Kawaki killed the man who she admired the most, the 7th Hokage. That is a ton of hate to power Sarada as she embarked on her first real training arc and was starting out at a floor that was a clear Kage level. However, we're going to move along and keep the review flowing. Sarada is then shown explaining to Konohamaru, and by extension us as the audience, that the jutsu that Hidari used on her, it was Sasuke Chidori, and she's staring a hole through Hidari trying to figure out who he is, and this is very poetic because it goes back to and reverses the very first meeting between Sasuke and Sarada that we have in printed format, which is their meeting in Naruto Gaiden, the 7th Hokage in the Scarlet Spring, where Sarada recognizes her father, but he doesn't recognize her. Now the roles, they have been reversed. But what is heartbreaking is that Boruto, he didn't tell her this information about Hidari despite him knowing the truth. Maybe you could chalk it up to he didn't have time to, because Mitsuki did ambush him in chapter 6 before they could finish talking. But that Sarada versus Hidari battle, when it picks back up in a moment, it's going to be very emotional. This is where we shift over to the real meat and potatoes of the chapter, which is Kurama's revival. After the cliffhanger at the end of the prior chapter, everyone was left wondering what in the world is going on with Kurama being inside of Himawari, and now we are getting answers as to why Kurama was respawned inside of her and not out in the wild like Biju normally are. So after Himawari asked Kurama why is he inside of her when she wasn't a jinchuriki like her father, Kurama tells her that they're in a shared visual plane where they can communicate because they are both of the same mind and body now. And as Kurama speaking to Himawari, we have Team 10 freaking out because Himawari, she hasn't moved, and Jura, he's giving chase to them and he is quickly catching up. Kurama basically gives a refresher for fans who forgot what Naruto's manga told us repeatedly. When a Biju dies, they are ultimately resurrected. Even if both their bodies and their soul perishes, they still reappear. Basically, they are the representation of the cycle of Samsara, which is what all the 6 past powers are rooted in. That's basically the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. While burial mode was different in that losing Biju chakra does not kill a jinchuriki like it normally does, it still killed Kurama, which, as a quick reminder, because I know some of you guys are probably wondering, is this both halves of Kurama inside of Himawari? The answer to that is yes. Baby Kurama has both halves because the Kurama who died possessed both the yang half of Kurama that Naruto was born with and that Madara extracted from Naruto before he became a Ten-Tails Jinchuriki, and the yin half of Kurama that Obito sealed into Naruto to keep Naruto from dying. The yang half then agrees to go back into Naruto's body when Hagoromo asked him in Naruto Volume 72. The resealing for that occurs following the Naruto versus Sasuke fight off screen. Now, this is where we get our big bombshell and the most controversial part of the chapter. Kurama says that the amount of time a Biju takes to reform or where they respawn, it isn't set in stone, which prior to this, we only had very loose ideas for about how long it would take a Biju to respawn respawn via the Three Tails being in 2 different jinchuriki in a short time span, with Rin Nohara getting the Three Tails sealed inside of her during the 3rd Ninja War, and then Yagura, the 4th Mizukage, somehow ended up getting the Three Tails sometime after that, and then Obito and Deidara ended up capturing the Three Tails in the Naruto manga 3 years after Yagura died. But Kurama reveals that Himawari was born with a fragment of his chakra, and that's what points us to Kurama respawning inside of Himawari of all people. It should be worth noting that this is the first time in history of the Naruto franchise that we have seen a male Jinchuriki have children, but the franchise, it has told us that there are unexpected and unexplained complications when it comes to Jinchuriki and them having children, which that might be why we rarely see Jinchuriki have children. So allow me to explain. So in Naruto Volume 53, when we go back to the flashback that Kushina had where she's telling Naruto, hey, this is how you are born, minus all the birds and the bees stuff, but basically on the night that you were born, this is what happened. When a female Jinchuriki is in the process of childbirth, the chakra of a Biju, it can escape the body of a Jinchuriki because the seal, it is weakening. However, we've never been told what the complication is for a male Jinchuriki when they have children, and now we see what it is. The Biju chakra does get passed on to the children, a fragmented piece. But if you're the Kage of a village, the reason why you forbid a male Jinchuriki from doing something like this is because not every person, including people who share the same blood as you, there's no guarantee they're going to be compatible with the Biju. With the Nine Tails, this is even more so the case because out of all the Uzumaki they could have chosen, Kushina was picked because she had rare chakra even amongst the Uzumaki clan. Naruto and Mito, that's not like his great-great-grandmother or anything like that. But I bring that up to say this, there's more depth to it than you would really think about on a surface level at first, but my video on where did Himawari's Biju chakra come from goes more in depth, so watch that if you still have questions. So after Kurama and Himawari, they take the next few moments to start accepting the situation they're in, with Kurama once again being bound to another Uzumaki and Himawari now being a Jinchuriki. They formally introduce themselves and Kurama gives Himawari back control of her consciousness, and not a moment too soon because Jura, he isn't just closing in on Team 10, but he's getting so close to Himawari that she's already beginning to freak out because Jura, he's preparing another Biju Dama to fire off at her and her friends, and Himawari is showing us that once again, you can do all the training you want, and Himawari, she's been training hard for the last 3 years, but there is no real substitute for true combat experience, and this is her first time being pursued by someone who is specifically targeting her and wants to do more than lightly spar with her, and she is out of her element, very much so the same way that, say, Sakura was when her and Chiyo, they fought against Sasori. Sakura, as Chiyo tells us, was more than capable of dodging the attacks of Sasori, but when the fight first started, Sakura had never faced bloodlust like this before. She started doubting her training because of how experienced Sasori was, and Chiyo had to give her that confidence boost. So Jura, he shoots off his Biju Dama at the wing of the ink bird that Inojin produced, and as they begin to start going crashing down towards the ground, let us take a moment here to both appreciate the calculation of Jura here as well as the skill of Jura, once again showing that he's on a different level than the awakened Shinju, and by extension that makes him even deadlier because the guy, he just targeted the wing in order to avoid doing too much damage to Himawari, all while compressing down the Biju Dama to that size and restricting the area damage on top of that. And this is even more so impressive when you realize that he views the members of Team 10 as fodder that he can kill. If Himawari is the main dish, the members of Team 10, they're the appetizer. The next thing we need to appreciate is that Chocho, she does some quick thinking and she uses her clan's hidden jutsu, the Yang release expansion jutsu, to blow up her stomach to a giant size so that everyone that can get on her back and her shoulders and they can hold on for dear life, while she uses that extra belly rolls and love handles in order to absorb the impact from falling on the ground. But based on the impact, Inojin appeared to have at least gotten a considerable amount of distance away from the Hidden Leaf Village, and even Jura notes the potential of Team 10 and their teamwork in particular, but he laments the fact that it doesn't matter because he's gonna have to kill them because he's forced them to. Basically, if they stood aside died and they allowed him to eat Himawari, he wouldn't have to kill them. But as we all know, that was never going to happen. So when Himawari once again begins to start freaking out, showing her inexperience, Kurama finally speaks up, basically telling Himawari that, hey, it's pointless to start crying and acting like a baby and freaking out, because in short, this is all going to be up to you, whether or not she wants it. Himawari is a jinchuriki now, and as a jinchuriki, your fate is to either be used as a tool of war, is to be used as a sword and a shield for protection, or it is to be hunted down by those who are intrigued by your power. And that's where she is currently. That is her fate. Just as Sasuke told Boruto in Boruto Naruto Next Generations chapter 80 that if he was truly Naruto's son, he could endure whatever life threw at him, and that Boruto, like Naruto, had no choice but to endure. Kurama, without using as many words and without saying the exact same thing, he tells her in a way, hey, this is all up to you. You've got to suck it up, little girl. He says he can give her all the power that she wants, but it's on her if it's used properly or wasted. Her fate, and Kurama's fate by extension, it is in Himawari's hands, and that makes a lot of sense. She's in the same boat that Naruto's in, so allow me to explain what I mean. So Naruto, for a majority of the series, he had less than desirable chakra control, despite being 16-year-old Naruto in base, who with no Kurama had 4 times the chakra of Kakashi. Nobody would say he was 4 times stronger than Kakashi. Base to base, you could argue Akatsuki suppression art Kakashi would whoop the mess out of Naruto if he couldn't use Kurama's chakra during that time, because he wasn't able to properly control all this chakra without wasting it. So he couldn't use chakra to properly amp up his physical stats like Tsunade does when she gets extra strength for power and combines it with her chakra control, like the Raikage does with his speed, or like Kakashi does when he extends his stamina when he uses the Sharingan. Naruto, when using 1/2 of Kurama in the Akatsuki suppression art, was stated to have 100 times the chakra of Kakashi, but again, he wasted a lot of his chakra, which is why when he gained close to perfect chakra control in the early part of the war, he was an absolute monster. He was able to do damage to Kisame, and when he got full perfect chakra control, Naruto became an even bigger monster, to where he was knocking on the door to Hashirama's level of power before Naruto got the 6-pass amp. What Kurama is telling Himawari is that how all this plays out, it is up to you, but before he eventually gives her his chakra to use, he says that her chakra, it is greater than every jinchuriki that came before her that he was attached to. So that includes her father, that includes Kushina, that includes Mito. Now this is where this gets very interesting. So it comes down to what translation you use. So is Kurama referring to the quality of her chakra, or was he referring to the quantity of her chakra? And that's where it does get tricky, because due to Japanese not translating word to word into English, due to Japanese having multiple alphabets, there being words in English that don't really exist in Japanese, and Japanese being such a context heavy language, you can make an argument for both in that regard. You could say high quality in that she's more compatible with Kurama than any other jinchuriki prior, or you could say a higher quantity of chakra than Naruto, which would explain why Damon said he sensed the monster power inside of her, capable of dodging his attacks. In order to see which this is, we're going to have to continue reading a little bit and get more context. Now, this also leads to Himawari, and she's charging forward to Jura, and she's doing so on base, and that's very commendable. But she runs into the problem that Team 10 did, which is she doesn't have enough experience points to participate in this battle, and Jura, he very coldly breaks her ankle and tosses her to the ground. Very similar to how Ishiki snapped Boruto's arm when Boruto got in the way. Only in this case, Jura, he decides to take it a step further, and he traps Himawari in a wood release, telling her, hey, that pain in your legs is gonna subside soon once I eat you, and once the tree fully takes root. And this is where we see a moment that will likely break the heart of Ino fans everywhere. So what we have here is that Inojin is basically living up to his promise to protect Himawari no matter what. Like he said when they are rushing to the battlefield to confront Hidari and Jura when they first arrived, and as Jura began battling the members of Team 10 in the last chapter, and we see Inojin paying extra attention to Himawari, being very careful when it comes to her. All signs are pointing towards Inojin, that boy is gonna be in trouble. So Inojin basically gets promptly taken out with a kick to his gut when he charges up to Jura with the intention to free Himawari, and then he gets a wood release branch that impales him right through the middle of his stomach, and it leaves this kid leaking out fluids like he's an OnlyFans model. And the only real hope that Inojin fans have right now now is that might have been an ink clone, but there's no indication that was the case, and this is what leads to Himawari finally snapping. However, before we do Himawari's interaction here at the end of the chapter, let's just take a moment to realize the pain that both Ino and Sai, they're gonna be feeling right here. So Sai lost his brother in the training due to the method of Danzo's root organization, where you would be friends with somebody, you be comrades, you grow together, and then Danzo would say, hey, kill your best friend, the winner, you join the Anbu Black Ops. Though Sai's situation, there's some different circumstances that come with it that the Naruto war tells us, but Sai carried around that guilt. So you can only imagine what Sai losing his son would do to him. And when you transfer that over to Ino, it's even more heartbreaking. She lost her master to Hidan. She lost her father to Madara shooting off a Bijudama via the Ten Tails. And now she seemingly lost her son to another Ten Tails. And because Ino is connected to Shikamaru and she's part of the sensory unit, Ino more than likely sensed her son's life force absolutely plummeting, and that is heartbreaking in of itself. And this is what truly makes Himawari in this moment so very special. Her hair, it begins to start flying upwards like Kushina's when she gets angry. The Kurama chakra, it is moving through her body. We don't have an aura or anything like that yet, but she has enough going through her body that she immediately shatters the wood release, and her eyes, it takes on the appearance that Naruto did when he would borrow some of Kurama's chakra. Her broken ankle now appears to be healed via the jinchuriki healing factor. Now, I do think it is worth noting Inojin's injury, in spite of it looking very serious, we have to keep in mind that it is being buried behind this huge Himawari reveal. So we are being distracted from Inojin's fate. And this is important to keep in mind because we don't know if this attack killed him. And if he wasn't killed, we don't know what his fate is about to be because we have no proof that Himawari has the chakra control needed to hand out the chakra cloak, and let alone use something like the Kurama avatar, which, as we saw with Guy and Kakashi, when Naruto used it with them, he was able to begin treating them and restore some of their chakra and some of their injuries. And it's important to note that right now Himawari is not using a chakra cloak. So to heal Inojin of his injuries, we can't say right now that this is something that Himawari can do because we don't have anything that indicates that Himawari can do something at the age of 13 that her own father couldn't do until he was 16 going on 17 during the 3 days of the Fourth Ninja War. But we end off the chapter with Kurama gassing up Himawari to go ahead and cut loose. Gaslighter Kurama, he ain't back all the way, but he's at least telling Himawari this dude don't want no smoke because he's putting up smoke detectors. And Himawari, she's already staring down Jura. She's ready to take his head off, and Jura has noted there's a change in her power, there's a change in her appearance. It's rising a lot faster than you can click on the board to playlist on to the right, or you can click on the latest video on my second channel on the left.